And when it comes to think about the format of these high-intensity training sessions, I think we can gain great insights from the tactical periodization paradigm. Obviously, tactical periodization is first a tool for coaches and the way they design the session, the way they program the session within the week in terms of their tactical objective, put it this way. So I'm not here to talk about football tactics, obviously, but I'm going to use a little bit the idea that is behind the tactical periodization paradigm to have a better understanding, or to have some suggestion how we can program and select different high-intensity formats in that case. So what I really like with this periodization approach is that we tend to say that physiological dimension provide the biological framework where the soccer-specific training recovery continuum lies. So the idea is that we program we program the football in relation to the demands of that football, so that it's well organized and it makes sense in terms of developing some qualities and having those qualities to recover as well. That means that most of the time, a training day might be oriented around a given quality, and the idea is to align the tactical objective of that day with the emphasis on a given quality. And as you can see in this example, which is obviously a bit more theoretical than that, and obviously it's always more complex in practice, but the idea is to have, for example, a given day where all the quality targeted throughout the session are more oriented the strength quality, for example. In that case, we're going to try to have every single component of that session, would they be tactical or physical as a primary objective, they will tend to stress the strength component. Another day, all the different sequences of that session will actually try to stress more the endurance or aerobic side of things. So the type of tactical or technical drills will be more aerobic, or they will be more taxing more the aerobic system, and all the physical conditioning will try to focus more on this aspect rather than the muscular system that will be more targeted during the strength day, like for example. And the third typical kind of training day, if we follow this paradigm, is as we call the speed days as well, where again there will be way more emphasis on speed, reactions, accelerations during the tactical drills, as well as during the conditioning aspects. So in this context, where we try to focus on a given quality on a given day, that likely helps to really target further a quality. Like if we wanted to work a little bit on strength every day, that might be problematic because maybe the load won't be enough. With this idea is to focus a bit more on that quality on a given day, and then let this quality recover the following days. And conversely, when we're working on endurance, for example, we're going to focus a bit more on a given day so that the load and the stimulus on that quality is higher on that day. And again, we let this quality recover the other days. So this alternance might be interesting. Again, that's more kind of a theory than anything has been really proved scientifically, but at least it makes sense in terms of alternating contents to increase adaptation, to reduce interferences. But what is very interesting with this approach is that it gives us, as conditioning coach as well, some kind of guidelines to make better decision on which high-intensity training format to choose on a given day. So if you follow the reasoning, that means that once we have defined the physiological targets of that day, all right, so today it's more a strength day, it's more endurance day, it's more a speed day. Again, I think it's important. That's what I'm suggesting is it's pretty simple. It's not as simple in reality, but again, it's just to discuss the process, and again, it helps to make the decisions. So once a physiological target of a session is decided, then the idea is to understand what would be the physiological demands, the appropriate physical demand, the best targets for this particular high-intensity training session. So if we are on a strength day, put it this way, we're going to try to have high-intensity training sessions that also targets the neuromuscular system. So that's the so-called type 2 or type 4 formats that I'm going to discuss just after. Conversely, for a typical endurance day, we're going to try to have a high-intensity training format that actually taxes the aerobic system at high level, but in this case, we're going to try to avoid as much as possible the neuromuscular load of the session in the context of letting this system recover. Since we have tried to emphasize on this system the day before, during the strength day, during the aerobic day, if we implement high-intensity training, we need a session that doesn't tax again the neuromuscular system so that it can recover. So in this context, we will be targeting what we call a type 1 high-intensity training. So once you get a bit the idea, I think it's important to progress further and understand these different high-intensity types so that we can just select and choose which type are we needing today during this session in that context. So to understand these types, that's something I've been working now for almost 20 years. I've been trying to simplify those acute response to those high-intensity sessions, just to build up some kind of very simple families. So those families are those types, but to create those types, I'm just used to break down those acute responses at 3 levels. The amount of time spent in the red zone in terms of cardiorespiratory responses, so the VO2 max responses, or the time spent close to or near VO2 max, which obviously relates to ventilatory work, cardiac work, but also the oxidative turnover into the muscles and so on. So that's really the oxidative aspects of a session. Then we have the anaerobic aspect of a session that is most of the time linked to the production of lactate, but also the amount of glycogen depletion of a session, which is important in terms of recovery, because obviously, if for any reason you're performing a high lactic session, that means glycogen depletion will be greater, and then you have to be mindful of the location of this session in comparison with games to make sure you have recovered, for example. But that's important too. The third level of those acute responses to a session or the demands is actually the level of neuromuscular demand of a session. And that's probably the most critical in our context, where we need to modulate as much as we can the amount of neuromuscular demands of a high-intensity training session. Some sessions should and need to involve a lot of neuromuscular demands so that we increase the demands on that system, like during a strength day, for example. But at some other moments, for recovery runs, for rehab players, or when we are more targeting those endurance days, it might be important to be able to implement high-intensity training with as minimum as possible neuromuscular demands. So when we look at those 3 families or types of acute responses to the training, aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular demands, we can then produce different sessions targeting just 1 or 2 or 3 and a different combination of those families. So as you can see, an example would be to have, as I like to say, a type of John Rambo approach. So that's making the kind of analogy between the army throwing bombs everywhere and exploding everything and having obviously a lot of collateral damage. We're just killing a bit everything, while having this John Rambo approach, we're just gonna try, like Rambo with just his knife when he goes into the forest, you know, he's going to hit really, really, really precise targets. And in that case, if you look at an example of a session, would be a session that hits especially the aerobic system and the anaerobic. That will be the one in the middle. The session on the extreme left will be aerobic and neuromuscular system, but trying not to tax the anaerobic system for many reasons. Another type of session, as the one on the right, could be targeting aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular. So in that case, targeting all the three types of responses. So a more mixed type of session. With the idea that every type of session is actually better appropriated for a given time, a given session at the right time of the year, at the right time of the week, and so on. So think more about the Rambo approach, being precise in the description, in the selection, than just hitting all the targets with those collateral damage. So the way we progress into selecting the right hit types, so those families of responses, is pretty simple, and I like to use this kind of a decision tree to go further into the decision. So first of all, on the left side, we have many variables, including the player profile, the adaptations targeted, and more importantly, as we discussed a lot, the microcycle and the programming. So based on these different considerations, the idea is to ask ourselves the first question. Are we looking for aerobic responses or no? If the response is no, then we go through the route, we go in the bottom of the graph, and we're gonna go for exclusively anaerobic type of responses. If again, we want to avoid the anaerobic responses, we go directly to a typically non-metabolic type of session, which is just a purely speed and strength session, which we call the type 6. But again, that's to me not the matter of the talk today, of this lecture. So I'm going to pass on, but that's the idea. Avoiding all the metabolic component in the end, it's about doing a speed or a strength session, so that's type 6. I want to discuss now the first 5 types that relate to high intensity training. So let's say we stay in the bottom of the figure, but now when the question was, shall the session be anaerobic, we go for yes, and in that case, the session will likely to be very, very taxing for the anaerobic system, and most of the time when it's taxing for the anaerobic system, glycolytic anaerobic system, it's also taxing for the neuromuscular system. So this is typically a type 5, what we call a type 5 session, which taxes the anaerobic glycolytic system and the neuromuscular system. Let's go back now to the first question about shall the session be aerobic or not? So then we said yes. Then the second question is aerobic, okay, but should it be anaerobic glycolytic as well? Yes or no? If we choose no, then we go for the third question, which is about the neuromuscular component. Shall the session be taxing the neuromuscular system? Yes or no? If it's a no, it becomes what we call a type 1 session. In that case, it's a session that is meant to target only the aerobic system, trying to keep lactate very low and trying to keep neuromuscular demands very low as well. Typically, the types of session that you would like to do with a player coming back from injury, you just want to target the cardiovascular system, but nothing else, or when you're doing kind of a metabolic but recovery types of session, you just again want to target the system. Often we are looking for what we call the type 2 sessions. So back to the decision tree, the type 2 sessions are aerobic yes, anaerobic no, but neuromuscular yes. So we went through the different routes of the selection, and in this case, the session taxes the cardiovascular aerobic system, taxes the neuromuscular system, but does not taxes the anaerobic glycolytic system, which again is probably something that we use often, where we just want to probably get in a little bit of conditioning with a little bit of neuromuscular constraint to kind of stimulate the players on those important aspects, but trying to avoid the additional anaerobic contribution that will create fatigue and obviously be perceived as way more painful. So in my context, I've been using a lot these type 2 type of targets. And then just keeping on, we have the type 3, which in this case are both aerobic and anaerobic, but without neuromuscular constraint. And then you have the type 4, which includes include hitting all the different targets, because they hit aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular system. So a type 4 is typically the total mass destruction weapon, hitting all the targets at the same time. And it's often important to use target 4, because again, competition is also a big type 4. So during a game, during a match, players hit their aerobic, anaerobic, and neuromuscular system at high levels. So the type 4 is probably the more specific to the game, but that doesn't mean that we need to use type 4 all the time, and we probably need to alternate and select the most appropriate type when it comes to selecting to making the decision on the training sequences to implement. As you could see on that slide, I've been talking only about targets first. So I've been thinking physiology first. I've been thinking, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to target in terms of physiological responses? Then we need now to translate those hit types or targets into the actual weapons. What are we using? Are we using long intervals or short intervals to hit the type 1 or the type 3? That might appear a bit complex at the moment, because I'm sure that, and that's the reality, most people think initially about weapons, formats. Okay, today we do a 15-15. Today we do repeated sprint. Today we do long intervals. But if you think like that, you might lose the ability to be precise. You might lose the ability to work like Rambo. If for any reason you just go for repeated sprint, you will never be able, with repeated sprint, to target type 1 or type 2, for example. Because repeated sprints are definitely a type of type 4 or type 5. So I would consider, and I would suggest people just to step back and think first about the physiological objective of a session in terms of those 3 types of responses: aerobic, anaerobic, neuromuscular. Which of the 3 are we willing to target for that session? And then further on, let's see which are the weapons or the formats that can be used to target those objectives. So again, going back to our example using the tactical periodization training paradigm for that, question is on that example, on that strength day, which is the weapon we're going to use. So we know on that strength day we're going to go for a type 2 or a type 4. That means we want to implement high-speed training with neuromuscular demands in this case. So type 2 or type 4. Type 2, aerobic, neuromuscular. Type 3, aerobic, anaerobic, and muscular. But what do we use now to hit those type 2 or type 4 types? Are we using short intervals? Are we using long intervals? Are we using small-sided game or game-based? That's probably the question. So we might have to think a bit further than that as well. In terms of neuromuscular response, there is another level of decision to make in the decision tree, is that if the session is actually neuromuscularly demanding, do we need to have some high-speed demands into that, which will likely target more hamstring, or we want to have more kind of glute posterior chain demands, which could be more related to acceleration, deceleration, change of direction. So within the neuromuscular demands of a session, again, there is this second level, high speed, and or again, what I've been used to call mechanical work, including accel, decels, and so on. So that complicates a bit further, but I'll show you that in the next slide, how we complement the decision tree. Once everything is decided about which are the demands we want, we just have to select the right weapon. And this is what is shown now on this decision tree. So it's the same decision tree as before, but as you can see, when we had a yes, when we were selecting the neuromuscular demands, then we go further. All right, neuromuscular demand of the session. Are we looking for high speed, or are we looking for mechanical work? And after that, you can see now the weapons that are the more appropriate to hit those targets. So for example, if you wanted to hit a type 1 session, the only type of format that is available or that can match this type is actually using short intervals. Because it's only with short intervals that you can manage and arrange the load, the cardiovascular load to be high without taxing the anaerobic system and without having important neuromuscular demands. So type 1, the only option is short intervals. For type 2, you have a bit more options. You can use either short intervals or small-sided games. For type 3, even more choice. For type 3, you can use short intervals, long intervals, and small-sided games. For type 4, again, you can use short intervals, long intervals, small-sided games, but also repeated sprints. So that's cool. If you want to hit type 4 types of target, you have all the tools, all the weapons available. Conversely, if you want to be precise and target type 1s, you may only have to use short intervals. So the question now is how, and especially if you see that short intervals can be used for about every single type of responses, short intervals can be used for type 1, type 2, 3, and 4. Now the question is how do we modify the type 1, the short intervals formats to make sure we really hit the right targets. That's something we're going to discuss afterwards. In this example, we could select a type 2 with high-speed running, and for that, a type 2 with mechanical work, and we're going to use small-sided games. Small-sided games obviously constrain space. That means that the high-speed components won't be much, but on the other side, there will be a lot of repeated acceleration, deceleration, so a high mechanical work during the small-sided game. So going through the whole process, that's how we could come to select the most appropriate format. So I'm going to go now through the example of a strength conditioning session on a given day, for example. So again, the idea is to align every single component or sequence of the session towards targeting the same quality. So we're gonna try to have some neuromuscular demands in the warm-up already. Then there might be some proper type of strength work on the pitch that you'll see some videos just after. Then a proper HIIT or high-intensity training block, which is likely to be a small-sided game in that case, as we saw, targeting type 2 or type 4, having as targets for those small-sided games, maximal intensity of actions, adequate rest periods, and also a high number of player to playing area ratio, so that there's a lot of constraint and players that just have to repeat and receive the ball, pass the ball pretty often. In that session, we might keep on with some tactical and technical work, finishing work, and maybe some cool down and recovery. And you can see here those videos, examples of the different drills during this horizontally force production oriented training. So you saw on the upper left players kind of dragging weight, so resisted sprint, laterally with the elastic bands. They were doing some change of directions at high speed, and then a bit of plyometric drills. And this is complemented just after by a small-sided games, short format. We have 4 players against 4. So with a lot of density and some high-intensity actions repeated throughout the time.